Hey friends, I want to thank our sponsor, Raygun. Are you struggling to replicate the bugs and performance issues that your customers are reporting? Plug Raygun into your web and mobile applications right now and diagnose problems in minutes rather than hours. Kiss goodbye having to dig through log files and relying on frustrated users to report issues. Make your software development life so much easier using Raygun's error, crash, and performance monitoring tools. Every software team can create flawless software experiences for their customers with Raygun. Try it free today at raygun.com. That's RAYGUN.com. Hi, this is Scott Hanselman. This is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm talking with Emily Gorcenski. She's a hacktivist who has a background in aeronautical and mechanical engineering, and then also a degree in mathematics. And you worked in the healthcare industry, didn't you?
Yeah, that's correct. I was a research engineer and worked on a number of biomedical research projects, building medical device software and medical devices themselves, actually.
This is of really, really important interest to me, not just because of the current environment, but also my situation as a 25-year type 1 diabetic. I've been on an insulin pump from a company called Medtronic for now 15 years. This is a device that in 15 years has never failed me, not once. It hasn't shut off, rebooted. I consider it the space shuttle of devices. But of course, I'm hacking into it and using an open source artificial pancreas, using it in ways it was not particularly designed to use. We'll come to that a little bit towards the middle. But if we look at the current environment, what are we facing?
Yeah, there's been a lot of talk, especially in the past few days, about the lack of ventilators as we're looking at the surge in coronavirus cases that's on the horizon, and also the lack of personal protective equipment for healthcare workers and also the general public. And to me, this is interesting because this is a pretty interesting case of a medical device shortage. Personal protective equipment like face masks and gloves and things like that, those are actually regulated medical devices. And one of the challenges that we see when we have something like a medical device shortage is that it's actually quite difficult to legally manufacture and sell a medical device. So it's not easy to scale up production so quickly.
Is that a global thing or is that an America thing? Is it everyone is careful about allowing people to create medical devices?
More or less, yes. So let me preface this with a couple of disclaimers here.
Mm-hmm.
First, that I am not a lawyer. As you mentioned, my background is
Mm-hmm.
in aeronautical and mechanical engineering and mathematics. I have studied medical device regulations, but I
Mm-hmm.
am not a professional in the certification process in the United States or overall. And I also want to be clear that what I'm saying here is not the opinion of my employer. This is just my own um, background. So that said, it is different around the world. The United States regulations are different than those in Canada, different than those in the UK, and different than those in Europe with the European Union regulations. There's obviously regulations that affect every part of the world, every country, but the ones that I'm most familiar with are the American set of standards.
Mm-hmm.
However, there is an international set of medical device standards that is more or less uniform in how they are built and designed and audited, essentially.
Mm-hmm. So the shortage right now, for example, if we look at masks, you just can't. I just can't start up a company in my garage right now and start selling masks and tell everyone that these are great. There is formal testing standards about whether or not these are in fact effective, and specifically, do they meet all of the standards, whether they be ISO standards or medical standards and all of the above, and do the thing that they are intended to do, which is keep people from getting ill. They are personal protective devices that are regulated medical durable equipment.
That's correct. So the FDA in the United States is the uh, body that is empowered with regulating the manufacture and sale of medical devices. And the FDA has sort of at least three missions. One is
Mm-hmm.
food, the other is drugs, and then a tiny little sliver of that pie is medical devices. So it doesn't get a lot of attention compared to, say, pharmaceuticals. But what is interesting is like if you take something as simple as a surgical mask, that's actually a transmission barrier. And so when we look at how do you manufacture a medical device, what you have to do is understand the risk components of that. So it might seem like a surgical mask is nothing but some cloth or paper and elastics,
Hmm.
but what the FDA does is they go through and they make sure that the materials that you're using are biocompatible, that you're not creating skin rashes, that the filtration system is actually performing as expected. And then there's important things about how is the product packaged and what are the instructions. It's called labeling. What is the indications for use of the device? Are people properly trained on how to use it and what those risks are? And actually, that's not an impossible barrier to overcome, but it is a barrier that you have to overcome from a legal perspective.
That labeling concept is incredibly important. We hear things about things being used off label. There's talks about drugs being used right now off label. Medical devices, durable medical equipment can also be used off label, which is saying we know it's safe generally as a general extent, and you want to try it on this thing it is not formally labeled for, you can go and do that. I'm using a number of, actually two separate diabetes drugs right now that are for type 2 diabetics. I'm using them off label, which means my doctor knows that it's being used. The FDA knows that it's being used, but I'm ultimately on my own if it goes south.
Right, right, and that's the challenge. And if you are a medical device manufacturer, if you are somebody that is manufacturing something that is serving as a medical device, if you are not clear about those intentions, you can expose yourself to quite a lot of liability. And for those who are lawyers, that liability can be pretty severe in the United States.
Well, certainly we don't want anyone to get hurt, so it makes sense to have regulation of A, drugs, B, hardware, and then additionally software. But there have been times where things have failed. Like things need to be regulated because people could get killed, right? And people have been.
Yeah, absolutely. So, currently I work as a software consultant, and I'm fascinated by safety critical software. I've worked in it in every domain that you can think of, from medical devices to automobiles. And one of the case studies that we look at is this device called Therac 25. Therac 25 is a historical case study where it was a radiation beam machine back in the late 70s and early 80s. And over the course of a number of years, there were a handful of incidents where it created an overdose and actually led to people dying from the radiation beam. And this is widely believed to be one of the first instances of software killing somebody. In the wake of Therac 25, all of these new rules on how to write software for medical devices came about. So in the decade that followed, the FDA investigated what happened, and they met with experts and they met with people who understand how to do this from other industries like the space industry, the aerospace industry, folks from NASA, and they created a series of medical device regulations for software. And so that saying that safety rules are written in blood, in this case, literally holds true. There were 4 people who died as a result of this.
These things are so important. There's so much discussion right now about airplanes and their user interfaces. And there was a recent thing about touchscreens where someone was changing interfaces from switches and knobs to touchscreens. We've seen that as well in the missile defense and that missile warning that went out in Hawaii. We were trying to figure out why that would set, and everyone was told and texted that there was a missile warning. And it was, in fact, a poorly designed user interface that caused them to click the wrong button. Software sits between humans and computers and expresses intent, and it could be something as simple as a bug where they wrote the code wrong, or it could be a UX that expressed intent incorrectly, but the result is serious damage to humans.
Yeah, and there's a fascinating ProPublica series recently about a similar incident where a touchscreen device with improper training and so on and so forth is believed to be behind the incident where a U.S. Navy ship collided with another vessel at sea, and,
Oh my
and, and
goodness.
a number of sailors lost their lives. And actually, Therac 25 was a case of a UX problem. There was a bit of a race condition in the code that sat between the user and the actual device, and
Mm-hmm.
that race condition, which was linked to the user interface, it had to be initiated if you got a certain error message and pressed a certain set of keys with a certain timing. But what they did is because they went to software, they removed these hardware interlocks in the device, and that's what led to this overdose of radiation. So, these are patterns that we see over and over and over in the safety critical software world.
So, how do we get these devices then? Given that we know what all the different things we've just discussed that can go wrong, what stands between us and using medical devices on humans?
Well, the regulatory process is complex, but it is solvable. Certainly, there are ways that we can improve this process. The FDA has a long way to go. They're fairly slow at understanding how to deal with software development practices, things like that. But also, we can get better at writing software in safety critical systems. I think that some of the practices that we've learned and developed from doing global carrier scale distributed systems, we know what works. We know what reliability is. And it's a challenge to take those lessons and translate them into an embedded systems world where you're not building things that are dealing with, millions of requests per minute, but rather a small number of devices that have to run in high reliability mode. But there are still engineering practices that we can learn and apply to those domains. But it's something that will take years to shift that entire industry to that.
As a diabetic, I've always been told for the last 25 years that the solution is coming 5 years from now. And in every year, they tell me it'll be 5 more years. So I have found myself kind of knee jerk saying, well, they should let us try things more risky. They should let us be more risky. Is that a solution to experiment more and let more people get hurt? Or like, is this, how they're saying that right now it's going to be 18 months before there's a vaccine for the current situation? Is this, you can't just bang this out in a month or two? Should we be less regulation and more, I don't know, capitalism?
I don't think so. I think that there's certain time frames that need to happen. Like there's certain the risk calculus that we do when we look at a drug or a device or any intervention has to be around a way of weighting the public benefits against the public harms. We have to understand what that risk analysis is, and frankly, banging things out is more likely to get people hurt in ways that they don't expect. There's all sorts of secondary effects that
Mm-hmm.
you can have. Like if the vaccine is not effective and you don't do your proper studies for it, it could be that we start giving out vaccines that are ineffective. Maybe they're not harmful in and of themselves. They're not going to make you grow a third eye or, you know, um, something like that. But maybe they're just ineffective, and that creates a false sense of security. And then we have
Mm.
another outbreak, or, maybe they do cause cancer, or maybe they do, you know, have some other side effects. So those are the things that we try to suss out. And unfortunately, some of this stuff takes time, and it takes time to ramp up the production. We need to make sure that the facilities that are making these drugs or these medical devices, whatever it might be, are operating up to standards. There needs to be certain processes in place to be able to track batches and manufacturing
Mm-hmm.
runs. There's something called the Current Good Manufacturing Processes, the CGMP, that governs the ways in which a manufacturer has to abide by certain auditing and traceability requirements when you build this stuff. So, as tempting as it is to just say, oh, all we need to do is throw a bunch of 3D printers at the problem, we really have to be calm and say, is this going to actually make the current health crisis worse?
Okay. So it sounds like in software engineering terms, this isn't a scrum, let's iterate as fast as we can in a week. This is a waterfall process and requires getting it correct, in really, really getting it correct.
Well, I think, you know, I don't know that it has to be a waterfall process, but it's not a scrum process. There
Mm.
is an ability to operate in agile ways. It's just the pace is going to be much slower. And so when we
Mm.
have things that take a long time, what we need to do is understand how to efficiently parallelize um, those processes and those research
Mm-hmm.
efforts, and how to distribute some of that capability, and what is the best way, the smartest way to do it. Certainly we can work in an agile way, but it does. It's not building a website, right? You can't break something and then fix it based on what breaks. You actually have to get it right in the first place.
Yeah, I when I have a team here at my company that I manage, and I've led teams before, as I know you have, and I know that we as smart tech people believe that we can solve anything with tech, and it's very difficult to be put into a crisis and not be able to say, well, why don't you just, and I encourage my team to not say just, because it's such a way of minimizing a problem that you don't understand. I know that we're just spitballing here, but this isn't a why don't you just. This is a time for us to let the experts be experts.
Yeah, and I think it's frustrating, that we're seeing people like Elon Musk and James Dyson saying, "Oh, you know what we're going to do? We're going to build a bunch of ventilators." It's like, okay, first of all, I admire the heck out of Elon Musk's vision and what he is trying to do. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't want a bunch of Elon Musk fans coming after me for saying this, but the fact of the matter is, he has made a living off of doing an end around many regulations in the auto industry and in other industries. I don't want him doing that. Like, I don't want to be on a Elon Musk put together in 2 weeks ventilator. You know what I mean? If it was the difference between certain death and possible life, sure. But we have not yet exhausted all of our other options for that. And so, James Dyson, there was a headline saying he's built a low cost ventilator and he's going to build 15,000 units. And the British government is saying, well, that's great, but you still have to go through the regulatory process. So,
Mm.
um, we can fast track that, but let's get this going.
When you need to focus on building, do you want to get bogged down by your database? MongoDB is an intuitive, flexible document database that lets you get to building. MongoDB's document model is a natural way to represent data so you can focus on what matters. MongoDB Atlas is the best way to use MongoDB. It's a global cloud database service that gives you all of the developer productivity of MongoDB, plus the added simplicity of a fully managed database service. You can get started free with MongoDB Atlas at mongodb.com/atlas.
So that actually brings up an interesting question, though, and I put this only in my own context so that I might better understand. I have been asked, as I am using an open source artificial pancreas, which is a recalled out of warranty pump with a known security issue, an insulin pump, and I'm using it with unsupported, un-FDA approved software. So people say, "Aren't you concerned that it will XYZ kill you?" But I'm saying I'm okay with that. I am consciously and with attention saying not doing it is worse. My uncontrolled diabetes is worse to me. The result of that is worse than the risk. But I'm able to make that decision, while someone who maybe needs to be put on a ventilator doesn't necessarily get to take that chance, sign that paper to say I'll try a James Dyson 3D printed in a week ventilator.
Exactly. And so I think, when we talk about medical ethics, and this is something that has a long and troubled history. If you look at the history of modern medical ethics going back to the Nuremberg Code in the late 1940s, which came as a result of the doctor's trial in Nuremberg of Karl Brandt and several other Nazi physicians, that point number one of all of this is the informed consent must be freely and willingly given by the research subject. And you have the ability to create that consent or to give that consent for what you're doing.
Hmm.
Our processes, our social contract that we have is that if I walk into a hospital or if I am unconscious and brought into a hospital, I know, the people who brought me there know, my loved ones know, that that hospital is operating under a set of principles, that they're using devices that they know to be the safest that they can find, that they're using practices that are the safest that they know, that they're using staff that is trained. That is part of our social contract. And when we start looking for reasons to breach that social contract in the name of public health, I start to get very worried, because while it may seem benevolent now, there's a lot of ways that this can go wrong. And if you read the transcripts of the doctor's trial, if you read that history, Karl Brandt believed that what he was doing was in the public benefit. Of course, his public benefit was an Aryan nation purged of disabled people and Jewish people and the Roma and the Sinti people and just about everybody else that was not, Germanic and white. And we can very easily slip into that in ways that we don't see. Um, just look at what hospitals are using what equipment on what patients. We know that there is inequality in our medical system. And so this is all very, very relevant, important stuff that we can't just sweep under the rug and say, well, we have a global health pandemic. It's time to relax these standards and to, throw out this social contract.
So if we think about simpler things like masks, they're what you call class 2 medical devices. A mask is not as complicated as a ventilator, but it's still incredibly important. I understand that the Dutch received a large shipment of masks, but they chose not to use them because they felt that they were not meeting the standards. That's a big deal.
Right, and that was a situation where a Chinese company sent something like 600,000 masks to assist with the corona pandemic in the Netherlands and in Europe. And it turns out they were not manufactured to standards. And these masks had actually been distributed to frontline medical personnel. There were doctors and nurses in hospitals using them. And they had to be recalled because of that. And, maybe, again, if there's a shortage, is something better than nothing? Maybe. I'm inclined to say yes if you had to put me, under the spotlight. But it is still complicated. You mentioned that they're class 2 medical devices in the United States. Just to give the listeners some context, the class 2 is sort of the moderate risk category. Class 1 is the least risk, and class 3 is the most risk. And so, something as simple as a mask, it's actually the same risk level as a mechanical ventilator.
Wow. When it goes bad, people get hurt, and that's why it is classified as such.
Yep. So those classifications are not based on the complexity of the device or the cost of the device or the amount of research that has to go into it. They're based on a risk analysis on the potential harms that can happen if that device fails or if it's used improperly. And so, if you're wearing an N95 mask, if you're wearing something that is supposed to filter out 95% of particles under a certain size, there's a reason that you're wearing that. If you didn't need to have that level of fine filtration, you might use something cheaper like a surgical mask, which is also still a class 2 medical device. But the risks here are you catch a disease. You can transmit a disease to somebody. It's over your face. There's choking hazards or suffocation hazards. There's all sorts of stuff that you don't even necessarily think about when you're just saying, oh, I need to cover my face. And so these are actually quite important concerns.
Well, you brought up Elon Musk and Dyson, who are, certainly visionaries and well thought of it from their technical perspectives. But what about the smaller revolutionaries like Josef Prussia, the 3D printer? I think it's pronounced Prussia. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I wish I knew how to pronounce his name, but I think that is great because one of the things that we can do is focus on putting some of this sort of homebrew energy away from supporting the frontline medical personnel and more towards what can we do to help people in less risky scenarios. So what can we do to support people trying to go out and about and do their business, or who might have to go out in public because they are, a grocery store clerk or they're a delivery driver, something like that, right? Those are the ways that we can really help. So, what we should be doing, it's a resource allocation problem. The hospitals need the hospital grade stuff. We don't need the hospital grade stuff, even if it would be nice to have. So I do think that some of these 3D printing initiatives are great. And in my community, there's an initiative of building face shields from sort of scavenged and other equipment. And it's not necessarily for the hospitals, but it's for other people who are in areas of need. And we're distributing it to people who are working in grocery stores and stuff like that so that they can continue to provide the essential services that we all need.
That's a hard thing to hear, I think, but I think that it is the right thing. Is it, hey, I'm a smart technologist. Maybe I should drop everything and try to 3D print a new ventilator in my garage because, I alone can fix it. Is exciting, and it gives a sense of urgency, but it's also rooted in a sense of narcissism. But if I can help my local small business, if I can make a website for my barber or the local bagel shop that's going to go out of business because they don't have a technologist, those are things I do know how to make. Those are ways I can help my local community. Helping a school get online to teach classes because they don't have an IT department to do video calls is something that is desperately important and desperately needed, but absolutely not going to kill somebody.
Yeah, well, at least we hope so. And I think that there's a
I hope not. Yeah.
lot of great ways that we can help as technologists, right? If you want to build a ventilator, look, I'm sure that the ventilator companies are hiring right now because they're about to get $2 billion worth of orders. So go and that's not being facetious. If you want to
Wow.
do that, go do that. Technologists who can bring their software engineering skills from this very high-paced web distributed systems world and bring those skills into that sort of different world of technology development, I think that's a good thing. And there are people that we definitely need people who can do that. But if you want to help right now and do something immediate, the USDS recently, the United States Digital Service, recently shared a tweet where they're looking for like 2,500 volunteers doing technical coordination and other work. Communities need people to help manage technology, and sometimes it's as simple as just handling a spreadsheet. We need that more than we need somebody to try to 3D print a valve that is untested and unproven.
That is really significant. Like it feels like the only thing we can do sometimes is 3D print a valve because we are just desperately grasping for something to be useful. But I'm looking here at the U.S. Digital Response tweet that says, well, what are these people working on? It could be an ML engineer using OCR to pull fields out to help application processing, to help on internationalization, to translate things into local languages. Like you might be able to look at that list of things and say, oh, I'm a front-end developer. I can help my state, my municipality in some way that is still frontline work and truly important, but like you said, not pushing the limits of health ethics.
Totally, and I think that those are the most important things to do right now. That's what gets us through crises, right? Community gets us through crises. Um, so what we should be focusing on is building up our community first.
Mm-hmm. Now, the U.S. Digital Response is former U.S. deputy CTOs. So this is an it's not the government properly, but it's people who have been working in and around the government.
Yeah, so I don't know the entire background of that organization, but I know that it is closely related to some of the government sort of digital remodernization efforts, 18F and all of that, trying to bring the sort of very slow-moving ship that is the federal government's technology services into
Mm-hmm.
the modern world and getting people to learn how to do that the right way.
And then I'm going to make sure that I put links to all of this in the show notes, as well as everything that we talked about, the Therac 25 report, Dyson, Elon, all of these different folks, as well as some of the interesting stories like the Chinese masks being recalled. And I think also, as you mentioned to me before we started the call, just reaching out to your community, helping the community out, making sure that your neighbors are okay, and making sure that the people in your area, whether they be elderly or immunocompromised, have what they need is also a fundamental way that we can do to help.
Absolutely. And hopefully this will inspire some people to do that. And I'd love to hear what everyone comes up with on how they can help.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Emily Gorcenski, for chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me.
This has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.